Pain is much more like an emotion than a sensation, and I'm going to tell you why that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise to you. In this video, I'm going to use at least 12 different examples of language that we use on a regular basis to describe emotions that actually at the same time describe a painful experience. And I'll explain how the fact that we use language for describing emotions that sounds the same as if we were describing something very painful kind of cues us in on the fact that pain really is much more like an emotion than it is a sensation. First off though, let's start with a little science. And when we look at brain activity in people who have acute sort of sudden pain, we do find that the brain areas that are associated with active nerves sensing stuff that comes into the brain and informs it that there's something wrong in the body, then, acute pain tends to activate those areas of the brain. However, the longer that you've lived with pain, if you've lived with chronic pain for years, then the brain areas that are associated with raw sensation from your nerves to your brain, they are not very active. Instead, what they find is that areas of the brain associated with emotional processing are much more highly active in people with chronic pain. So even though it hurts and that experience is very real and there is actual brain activity going on inside your brain, it's actually much more like you're processing a difficult emotion. But let me just give you a few examples of common language that I think everybody can relate to. And when I say, pain is an emotion and emotions are painful, you might kind of raise an eyebrow and be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But let me just make it really simple. The most universal experience of how an emotion can produce legitimate pain, even though your body is not damaged, is heartbreak, right? And the fact that we even call it that, we call it heartbreak. Why? Because when you get your heart broken, you feel like your heart is being ripped in two. Is there something wrong with your heart? No, your heart is perfectly healthy. However, it feels painful. So an emotion, an intense emotion, can feel painful. Another thing that we use to describe stress is like when you're so stressed out and pent up that you say, oh my God, I feel like I'm at a breaking point or I'm about to snap. Well, that's pretty strong physical language. You're describing an emotion like anxiety and stress, but you're saying that something is gonna break or snap. That's a very physical, tangible description of something that should just be all in your brain, right? Or what about when we take on too much responsibility and we're feeling stressed out from that and we say that, oh my God, it feels like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders. So that's a physical feeling. You feel something in your shoulders, but is there anything wrong with your shoulders? No, of course not. Or a person that's really irritable and kind of an asshole might walk around and we say, man, that guy really has a chip on his shoulder. The next example is sort of subjective. So when you get nervous, you might feel like you have butterflies in your stomach, and that could be a very unpleasant sensation. I mean, imagine if you actually had butterflies in your stomach. That would be very unpleasant. However, there are some times that you feel like, oh, I've got butterflies in my stomach, and it's a good kind of excitement. So then, not only is this sensation like you do not have butterflies in your stomach, there's nothing wrong with your stomach, you're perfectly fine. However, depending on the context around it, whether it's a good nervous or a bad nervous, like, oh, I'm about to be disciplined, punished by an authority figure kind of butterflies in my stomach, versus like I'm about to go on a first date. That's kind of exciting butterflies in my stomach. Similar sensation in the body, totally different contexts. One feels painful and uncomfortable, and one feels really exciting and pleasant. Or what if you're watching a creepy, scary movie and you say, oh God, that guy just really makes my skin crawl. That's a really physical description of like, oh my God, your skin is crawling. That's terrible. But of course, there's nothing wrong with your skin. Or how about a good emotion? Good emotions can make us feel something in our body, like, oh yeah, I just feel all warm and fuzzy. Or maybe you meet somebody that you really like, you really hit it off, you have a great conversation, and you think to yourself, wow, talking to them was like a breath of fresh air, right? And that's a physical description of the way you felt in your body. That's a real feeling, it's palpable, you feel it in your chest, in your belly, whatever. Or you meet somebody that you hate, they're disgusting, they're despicable, and it makes you sick to your stomach. Or how about the emotional experience experience associated with having somebody in your life that just bugs the crap out of you, and you say, God, that person is really like a thorn in my side, and it kind of feels like it sometimes. Or when somebody betrays you and it feels like they stabbed you in the back. There is a real physical feeling of betrayal, being betrayed. You feel it in your body, and it is not pleasant. In fact, it's so unpleasant that we decided to say with our words that it feels like being stabbed in the back. That's dramatic. I think I'm kind of making the point here, but I'm just going to list off a few other examples of common language just to drive the point home here. Oh, when I found out the news that Johnny died, it really just felt like a punch to the gut. Yeah, the real estate business is really cutthroat. Yeah, Mr. Jones is a real jerk. He's kind of got a stick up his butt. Or in the land of musculoskeletal pain, we say, oh my God, it really feels like I've just got this knot in my muscle. Can you get it out? Of course, we know that your muscles cannot physically tie themselves in knots, so what you're feeling and what is really happening in your body are two very different things. But you describe it as a knot, and it feels like a knot, but it's not a knot. Or you walk into a chiropractor, oh doc, my hip is out. Is your hip really out? Is it dislocated? If so, you belong in an emergency room. You should not be going to your chiropractor or physical therapy for that, right? But I don't know, it feels out. Or sometimes you have pain in the neck, down the arm, and it feels like a burning pain. Of course, is the actual temperature of your skin hotter? Probably not, but it feels like it's burning. What's that about? Or one time I heard a little kid trying to describe his pain in the clinic, and when I asked, well, what does it feel like? He said, it feels like spiders. Does he have spiders under his skin? No, of course not. But that's probably just nervy pain. Or today I got to work with a patient with a lot of chronic pain and fibromyalgia and complex regional pain syndrome, a lot of chronic stuff. And they just described it as supercharged. And that's a totally valid description. The point is that the language that we use to describe emotions is sometimes indicating that those emotions feel physically painful. So the difference between pain that is based on sensation in your body, communicating information to your brain, versus pain that is more emotional in nature, it's a very blurry line. Now, I'm not saying that if you touch a hot stove and you feel pain, that has nothing to do with nerve endings in your fingers touching a hot stove, communicating damage to your tissues, to your brain, and then you feeling an experience of pain. Of course, tissue damage has a role to play in experiencing pain. But then let's say you've burnt yourself on a hot stove once, and then you go and you almost touch a hot stove, and then you quickly realize you're right about to burn yourself, and you quickly withdraw before you actually burn yourself, but you still feel in your stomach tighten and your heart tighten, and you feel kind of a dull, pain feeling in the hand. That's because your brain was creating this pain behavior, this experience of pain before you even touched the hot stove, because it remembered that the hot stove is dangerous because you'd already touched it once before. So even the expectation of tissue damage can create an emotional experience of apprehension, fear, and therefore pain. And all these reasons, all this language stuff is why it's so important that when we describe our body, our shoulder, we don't use fearful language. Oh, it's out, it's degenerated, it's off, it's bad, I have a bad shoulder. These language aspects can then feed on another emotional component of pain. Now, it's not that there's not something biological or structural that's contributing to shoulder pain, for example, but if we add the additional negative, feelings, emotions, expectations, fear to the equation, then we have two things that can contribute to our pain, and therefore our pain is going to be possibly worse. So it's just interesting to think about the relationship of pain and emotions and words and language. And remember, those studies on the brain activity of chronic pain patients actually does resemble emotional processing and not actual sensation, which is very strange. But we can use that information to reassure ourselves that even if we feel pain, it is not dangerous. It is not causing harm to our body, especially in the case of chronic pain. Like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.